They were among thousands of South Africans who were banned, beaten and jailed, but survived the worst horrors of apartheid. Sibongile Makabela, Daphne Khoza and Refilwe Moloto are all linked to the Black Consciousness movement. Tonight we speak to them, hear about the ideology and philosophy that played a pivotal role in the 1976 student uprising. We also ask if Black consciousness is still relevant in democratic South Africa. Time to Remember, written by my guests, along with at least 30 others, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Black Consciousness movement. And the writers believe that the contribution of women to Black consciousness is not given due recognition. In the book, the writers set the record straight by telling their own stories. Sibongile Makabela and Daphne Khoza are here with me, and we are waiting for Refilwe Moloto in our Cape Town studios. Very warm welcome, ladies. It's good to have you here. Daphne Khoza, how relevant is the Black Consciousness movement to today?
Jane, I just believe that Black consciousness will forever be relevant in South Africa because it is an attitude of mind, it's a way of a lifestyle. You know, I think there is no Black South African, even as long back as before, you know, we became student activists in the 70s. I belong to the era of the 70s, Steve Biko, the Pani Pikianas, the Strini Moodleys, the Sets Coopers, the Heron and Gokulus. And prior to that, you know, I think every Black person in South Africa had the consciousness of being oppressed. We were conscious that we were ravished by an oppressive apartheid system. And we lived in an era where we were docile and, you know, we were browbeaten. Even our parents knew. My mom, who was uneducated, I think she played for me a pivotal role in instigating, triggering my consciousness about poverty and the brutal apartheid system. I grew up in Sharpeville in Vereeniging, and my mother, an uneducated woman, I always feel that she was a first Black person. I was a child. But she is a person who will always say to me, you must never let anybody trod on your dignity. And then when Sharpeville shooting, it was a demonstration of Black people, you know, the Sharpeville massacre, wanting to rise against the apartheid regime and its oppression. So to fast forward to the era of Black consciousness, you know, I stepped into the University of Zululand, coming from Swaziland, where, despite my parents being uneducated, they realized when they said Bantu education is going to come on. My parents uneducated, they realized that there is something wrong in this education, because prior to that, we were in Roman Catholics in Roman Catholic schools, in Anglican schools, and when on the verge of it, Bantu education coming into operation, my parents were suspicious and were sent to Swaziland. And many of us from the Republic went to Swaziland. So from Swaziland, when I finished my London GCE matric, and I stepped into the University of Zululand, I will forever be grateful. But because I stepped in a situation where the SASO was already formed at the University of Tafelberg, that there was this uprising and militancy and resistance by students in the country, in universities and institutions of higher learning. And
okay, Sibongile, if I can bring you here, I mean, what sort of relevance is it in today's society, in a democratic South Africa, which is supposed to be all-inclusive?
Oh, absolutely. And there is nothing not inclusive about Black consciousness. What it is about finding yourself. And it's only in finding yourself and having strength in who you are that you can relate to the other. But if you don't know who you are, it's difficult for you to relate to the other, because your definition and your self of identity comes from the other and not from yourself. So Black consciousness was about making us aware of ourselves, of our own agency, of our own capabilities, even within a very oppressive system. So when I look at South Africa today, if there is anything you need the sense of the way of life that Daphne is talking about, of black consciousness. Because black consciousness does not make me wait for service delivery.
And is that
it creates a clinic
in today's society?
Absolutely, because if you're looking at the majority, and whichever way we slice this, the majority of the people who feel they're out of the system, they're marginalized and all of that, are still predominantly black, not by any lack of anything, but the design was exactly that. Verwoerd said, when he started apartheid and as the architect of apartheid, he said it will take 100 years to undo apartheid because it's systemic. And this is the issue. So if you're going to deal with something systemic, you've got not only to approach it from a service perspective. When you start saying, we will deliver houses, we will deliver education, you take away people's agency. So you take away the sense of being conscious about who you are. And black consciousness does not take away. It's not, Steve Biko put it more eloquently and probably should put it more eloquently than I would. But it's not a pigmentation. It's a sense of history.
Okay.
It's a sense of who I am from a historic perspective.
Let's bring in, Refilwe Moloto. You're a younger member, and I'm just wondering what sort of relevance it is for you, how you live your life through this philosophy.
Jane, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I think it was quite interesting, and I would definitely say it was an honor when Sam Woodley invited me to contribute to the book, specifically because obviously I haven't participated in the Black consciousness movement as we know it historically. But I think that was exactly why it was really important to me, is that, and even my story that I put forward is more about how it affects me today and the way in which it allows me or drives me or structures the way I approach the world. And I do think that the tenets of the Black consciousness movement, as was said earlier on, are as relevant today as they were back then. I was telling an anecdote this morning on a radio interview that we did about how when I was 6 years old, my father asked me what I wanted to do for a living. And I said, he's a lawyer. And I said, I'd like to be a human rights lawyer, and I want to take over your practice. And he said to me, well, if we're doing everything right, you don't need to be we won't need human rights lawyers by the time you grow up.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
And painfully, here we are, and we absolutely know that we do. So it's not necessarily just blackness, but it's LGBTQ, it's transgender people, it's Rohingya Muslims. There's something about the principles and the tenets of black consciousness.
Sorry, you raised an important point, which I want to throw to you. I mean, LGBT, as you talk about that now, women's rights. I mean, so has the movement changed enough in order to absorb these conversations, which are now increasingly relevant?
You can define yourself and identify yourself in whatever way from a black consciousness perspective. From a black consciousness perspective, I'm a woman. I'm an African woman. I'm a black woman. I engage from that perspective. I could be a lesbian woman. I am still very conscious about my history, my sense of history, my sense of identity, my sense of where I come from. And that's important because that releases my agency for all kinds of things, whether it's releasing it for other LGBTI rights, or it's about children, which I'm passionate about, or it's about women, which all of us have to be passionate about at this point in time in South Africa. It gives me a perspective. It gives me a philosophy that allows me to engage with the world. And that's all what it does. And once you frame the conversation from that perspective, you and I engage as equals. The problem as we all speak today, we will speak about the poor. We've already created a divide. There is us and there is them. So we're dealing with them and not with ourselves. And it's so much when you're not using the black consciousness as a way of analyzing society, you find yourself in exactly this thing. I come from Zola in Soweto, one of the townships that were said to be the most broken townships. Now, when I speak, it would be wrong for me not to speak as that girl. Because if I don't speak as that girl and I begin to speak about my own people, about my own identity, as the other, as the poor, And I fail to recognize that's my mom, that's my aunt, that's me, that's my identity. And it's deliberate, because in the creation of the class system, you've got to remove that consciousness, because that consciousness crosses across.
Increasing, I mean, obviously not consciousness of women. I mean, we all have it. But it's interesting that it's taken so long in the movement to finally acknowledge the role that women played in the past and now. You know, I mean, there's all the talk about Steve Biko, but not Mampela Rampele, which increasingly is coming out. Thank goodness. Why is that? Why has it taken so long?
I think it has taken long because, Jane, of the situation that when we started the Black Consciousness movement, we're at a situation where we were looking at ourselves and feeling that the most important thing about us was to have self-love and have Black dignity. So after, you know, then when Black consciousness led to the uprisings of June 16, it began to take a different dimension where you find that the other things came into play when most of the young people who were active in June 16 as a result of Black consciousness, some of them had to leave the country. For instance, I see it, even though people are not conscious of Black consciousness, when I look in today's time at the situation of the fees must fall, for me, when I look at it, it says to me, it goes back to one of the tenets of Black consciousness, which is about self-determination, where students are feeling in this era, they may not be aware that they're influenced by Black consciousness.
They need that awareness. Are we running out of time? Sorry, excuse me interrupting you. Phil, I just want to give you the last word there. I mean, students, younger people, the relevance in this movement, where would you like to see it going? What sort of impact would you like to see it have?
Jane, I want to answer that question, but I also want to just refer a little bit to the previous question that you had. You know, I think the reason that it took so long for us to even deal with women, and I think we need to be very honest and quite frank and open about this, is that there's a reason that identity politics is so fraught and so heated in the world all over, be it right-wing politics or, as I say, LGBTQ rights or it be women's rights. And that's the fact of the matter, is that people have mostly been othered. And even in this wonderful movement of the Black Consciousness movement, even these ladies who have come together to write this book have acknowledged that they have patriarchally been marginalized from the history and the annals of history of Black consciousness. And I think we need to absolutely acknowledge that and not act as if Black consciousness has actually been pure in its execution, even if it is pure in its intention. And for that reason, to your point, and when we speak about today, when we speak about fees must fall, when we speak about the movements that are on the go today, I think there's an absolute importance for us to recognize the fact that identity politics matter, inclusivity matters, and as much as I think Black consciousness movement tends to be perceived through a militant lens, for me, Black consciousness, in the way that I was raised in it, is all actually about empathy. It's about understanding, and it's about inclusivity, and it is ultimately about love. Self-love first, and then therefore your ability to love others. And in the same way that, say, Buddhism might profess to do the same, one doesn't need to necessarily impose Black consciousness on other people. But it is a manner in which Black people can certainly recognize themselves, love themselves, have empathy for our situations, be it poverty, be it class struggles, and be it sexual identification struggles and the like, and certainly gender-based violence and patriarchy, and be able within our own community, it's about communities really, it's about our community be able to respect and love one another and be able to transfer that to others. In the same way that a Buddhist might do so to us, in the same way that a Christian might say so. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and it's been fascinating hearing all three of your perspectives, and I look forward to reading the book. Rufilo Moloto, Daphne Koza, and Spongile Makabela, thank you very much. Up next, how complicit is Facebook to the sale of a young bride in South Sudan?